Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Royal Water Podcast, where Sam and I are joined by a very special guest today, Sarah Duncan from Lyon Turnbull, who's here to talk with us about the jewels of the Countess of Airlie going on auction in London later this month. And we were very lucky to get a special look at them last week and see them all in person. They are just such a magnificent collection. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. I'm so glad you were able to come in and view them.
Yes, no, we were so lucky, and thank you so much for laying them out. So I'll just start with just a general overview of the Countess collection, and the next slide, Sam, where we got to see everything laid out very nicely. Um, it is quite a varied collection, and that was one of the things we were discussing. So there's the antique piece with the heirloom tiara from the family, but there's also the brooches from Verdura. There's the cigarette cases and compacts and things from our own family. So it's a very interesting mix of different cultures and heritage coming together in this one single collection that's coming on auction.
It is, and in a way, it represents all of our collections when we're lucky enough to have family who have bought well with jewelry over the years. So you can see that there's pieces coming from her American heritage. You can see there's pieces that have come more from the Scottish side and the European collections. So yes, like many of us, her collections of jewelry were very varied. And it represents her own personal taste, but also the sort of legacy of her families.
And I think in the next slide, we can see exactly who she was. So, she, as the late Countess has a very unique legacy in which she was from a very wealthy American family. And I think she is really on the tail end of those dollar princesses that we think about that married into the British aristocracy. And her grandfather was the financier Otto Kahn, and
Mm.
she married in 1952 the heir of the Earl of Airlie.
Yes, that's right. So, two very important, very powerful, well-established families joining together, as was, not uncommon at the time. The Airleys were hereditary earls. They've held land since at least the 15th century. Airlie Castle dates back to 1432. So a very, very well established Scottish and British family. They began their ascendancy with their support of Robert the Bruce. So
Oh,
a family that has definitely brought literally centuries and centuries of support to the British monarchy and continues to do so today. And then, yes, as you say, Virginia Ogilvy came from two very substantial American families. And, that real sort of epitome of the last sort of years of decadence in the early 20th century with her mother running around France, becoming friends with, earls and dukes and all the sort of like of European society. And yes, she was that sort of last generation that we think of to come in and marry into British royal families and aristocracy, and it's a great sort of legacy to come together.
exactly. And I think one of the things that we were discussing when we met you was this picture taken at her debutante ball, which was the
Mm.
same one at which Jackie Kennedy and Lee Radziwill, they were also came out at the same ball. So she was very much at the heart of American society as well.
Absolutely, what a lovely connection to have. It makes me laugh because my grandmother was in New York around the same time, and my mother was, a few years behind. And I just keep thinking, do you think they were at that ball? I don't know. I don't think so. But yeah,
I
what
know
a
it's
lovely
so
age
special to
to
think
be.
of all the
Yeah,
connections.
what a lovely time to have lived through in such an age of, those last sort of glamorous.
Exactly. And then in the next slide, we'll see the Earl and Countess really continue that family tradition of being in the royal household and being part of the extended royal circle as their ancestors had done for many years. So the late Countess was a lady of the bedchamber to the late Queen from 1973 until 2022. And right here we see her behind the now King on
Mm.
the Queen's last visit to Scotland just a few weeks before she passed away. And behind her is the late Earl, who was the Lord Chamberlain of the household from 1984 to 1997. So they were both very much a part of the royal family's the royal household, but also the Earl's brother was married to the Queen's cousin, Princess Alexandra. So they were, in a sense, extended family members.
Indeed, indeed. And we know that Virginia Ogilvy's husband, David Ogilvy, was childhood friends with Elizabeth II. So they literally grew up together and were friends for the whole of their lives.
Exactly. It was so there were such long connections, and I think it's so touching that they both were able to be together in service and then be there for the late Queen until really the end of her life, and both only passed away since then.
Yeah, they died within, a very short time of each other, 70 years of marriage. It was very clearly that they had a very, substantial connection and a very monumental marriage that helped and benefited the whole nation with the service and the work that they did.
Exactly. And it's very touching to see that. So
Mm.
I think in the next slide, let's come to the, I think, highlight of the sale, which is the magnificent family tiara. And it's one of those pieces that I had been researching for, I think, almost 8 years now. And I've initially published my article in 2019, but since then it's been updating. But this is very special. And can you tell us what you've been able to find out more about the history and where it was made and the dates around that?
Sure. So first off, thank you for your article because I'm not ashamed to admit that we used it here at Lyon Turnbull doing research as well. So we're very grateful for you and all your work that you did. And it was useful. We're always doing a lot of different research, trying to bring as much context and history to the pieces that we can. So this particular tiara we believe to have been made by Garrod. Garrod was the crown jewelers from 1843 until 2027. The box that it comes in, which you had the exclusive to see, actually, I have to say we haven't brought it out very often, but it's delighted to do so for you. Lists R and S Garrod and Co. in the lid, and that was the name they traded it under from 1843 to 1909. Stylistically, in terms of the workmanship and the craftsmanship, I'm referring to this as late 19th century, so the last 20 years or so of the 1900s. It could extend into 1901, 1902, 1903. There was, of course, coronations around that time, and a huge amount of tiaras were being made. Now, frustratingly, and it reflects more widely about the way we always sort of historically treated the jewelry discipline, there is not a lot of records out there. There's
Yes.
a company that was a workshop for Garrod that is still going and has great archives. Those archives have been searched with no avail. I also went to access the Garrod archives, which are held by the V&A. And unfortunately, we couldn't come up with any design drawings or sketchbooks or anything like that relating to this tiara either. There's a lot for silver, which is considered a more academic subject, but historically, jewelry has not been treated with the due diligence it deserves and the respect it deserves, in my opinion. I used to joke when I started in this business that we knew more about ancient Athenian potters than we do about 19th century Italian jewelers. So there is some mystery around when exactly it was made and who commissioned it. So
Yes,
we've dated it to the last 20 years of the 1800s.
wow, so quite a journey you've been on to try to really locate the source of this, but it is, I think there's so many places where there's such a gap in scholarship, and at some point you're very lucky to even find a drawing or even some mention of somewhere. So for a lot of the jewelry that I research as well, it's really just tracking it down in old pictures and mentioned somewhere, but without that, it's
Absolutely.
very difficult to track down an exact point where it was commissioned or made or gifted. Yeah, so this tiara has had really quite a long record in royal service because it was earlier worn by Mabel, the grandmother-in-law of Countess Virginia, and she was a lady in waiting to first Queen Alexandra and then Queen Mary until almost the duration of the first half of the 20th century. So it was worn so often and at so many royal occasions before it was worn by, for almost 50 years by the late Countess. So it has really had such a record in royal service. And one of the things that you mentioned to us was that this was actually kept at Buckingham Palace and it came to you straight from the palace, which I think is very special.
Yes, it came from Buckingham Palace. It left Buckingham Palace to come to auction, which I think is wonderful. And you're right. Again, not often that you see a tiara that's been used in such close proximity to not one but two British monarchs, two queens. And again, the Countess of sorry, Mabel, the Countess of Airlie, was friends, personal friends with Queen Mary. So, being given that role as Lady of the Bedchamber was very important to her in her life. She was widowed, and it was a sort of, you know, continuation of her life now that she was a widow, and it was an important role for her to take on, and she did so, as you say, very dedicated. And of course, Virginia taking on the same exact role as her grandmother-in-law is just a very special full circle moment for the Airlie family.
Exactly. And it's amazing that they were in such close proximity. And then this is really the main family tiara we've seen. So the fact it was used from all this time is because a lot of the tiaras, especially of older aristocratic families, they're locked away in boxes and safes for decades on end. So the fact that this was used so regularly, that's what makes it such an extraordinary piece.
I've been sort of jokingly referring to it as a working tiara. When it came to us, as you say, it was stored at Buckingham Palace. It came to us, and it was full of multiple layers of velvet ribbon to support it, to make it more comfortable to be worn. It had bobby pins matching her hair color in the box and attached to the ends of the tiara frame. There was a lot of residue from hairspray and things like that on it. So it was wonderful to see a tiara that was being used, a working tiara, as it were. I have, of course, had it professionally cleaned in the interim, so it's looking a little bit sharper now. But it was lovely to see that tangible connection to what is a very busy court. Elizabeth's court was one which was very dedicated to events and activities, and she was intrinsic in all of those. She was always present there, supporting the Queen, attending gala dinners, state openings of Parliament, overseas visits, and she needed the jewels to match.
So the Countess really wore this tiara all the time, and paired usually with the pearl choker and earrings. So they were part of those working jewels. And like you're saying, she was present. I believe this was taken at a Guildhall banquet for the King
Mm.
and Queen of Spain in 1985. So they were a part of kind of the royal circle, and they attended alongside the Queen. She is often spotted at the back of state banquets, on overseas visits, and often at the state opening of Parliament, which was in the next slide. You can see her often there alongside the Queen. And she was, I believe, I kind of classified as the Duchess of Grafton. She was the head lady in waiting. She was the Mistress of the Robes, but the Countess was definitely among the second tier, who was always there and among the top more senior of the ladies in waiting. So she is present throughout the decades at all these different state occasions.
Indeed, very omnipresent, as you say, and it shows how much they must have kind of all relied on each other and trusted each other and worked so closely together for a very long time. The Countess of Airlie was Lady of the Bedchamber for a substantial amount of time, her whole sort of working life, as it were, and it just goes to show how much they must have relied on each other.
Exactly. No, and that kind of long-standing friendship is what makes these jewels especially so interesting for us to see that they were a part of that relationship and that working relationship in addition to the close friendship.
Yes, indeed. And it's so lovely to see that she kind of turned to the same pieces again and again to create that noble presence, to create that ambiance of her position, and to just show off how great these jewels looked. She did wear white a lot, which I think is lovely, and the beautiful
Yes.
luster of the pearls complement the necklace, the tiara, the dresses together. They look quite striking.
Yes, and speaking of the necklace, that I think is one of those things that she wore so often, and I believe the central clasp is a 18th century brooch that
Mid
it
1800s, mid
made it.
1800s, yeah. So a beautiful, lovely old cut, old European cut diamonds in there. And you can see when you turn it over, it is detachable, and the family did provide the brooch fitting. So a wonderful Victorian, mid to early Victorian example that has multiple lives. And it was obviously restrung to be worn as a choker. I will say the choker's quite petite. She obviously had a very slender neck, and it
Yes.
fitted her beautifully. It doesn't fit many people, I have to say. For her, she carried it beautifully.
No, I remember when you tried it out. It really made the choker come to life because seeing it just in your hands or just laid out, it looked quite small. But I remember when you tried it on, it really made it feel like it was such a really grand and stunning jewel as overall.
Yes, the chokers became very popular in the early 1900s. I think it was it Princess Alexandra had a little scar on her neck, I
Yes,
believe.
and to cover
And so
that, it really began the fashion.
exactly, exactly. Now, this, because the pearls we know to be cultured in this one, is slightly later than that time period, but that started the fashion and it continued. We can all think back to sort of the 1980s. Princess Diana would wear chokers like this, and the trend has never really gone out of fashion in many regards. I will say,
Exactly.
wearing it, and you're kind to mention that it looked nice on, it does help one's posture. You do stand a little bit taller wearing it. It's a lovely thing, like a tiara. It helps your posture.
Oh, I'd
So
imagine.
yes, it's a nice thing to have. And these
Yeah,
earrings, oh, I love these earrings so much.
they were
So
so stunning, and just being able to, I love the versatility of them and how much you use them overall.
yes, so these are set with Mabe pearls. These are probably mid 20th century. Frustratingly, there's no maker's marks or assay marks of any sort on them, but the workmanship on these is fantastically gorgeous. They are sort of stylized wisteria to me in my eye, but although a botanist and probably would put me wrong on that, but I stand to be corrected. But they're detachable, and you can see in the previous slide she was just wearing the tops of them. They're clips as well. They're not for pierced ears. So depending upon how one styles one's hair and one's outfit, you can add on the bottom or just wear the clips. But again, a beautiful example of just the pinnacle of 20th century workmanship on these diamond and mabe pearl earrings.
Course. And before we move on to the next other jewels, I do want to ask a question because you did tell us that you were given kind of a selection of jewels from the family and they decided to retain quite a few pieces. But I'm wondering the lady in waiting badge on the pink ribbon that the Countess is wearing, was it one of the pieces that you were able to see in person, or was it something that they just decided to keep overall?
Sadly, that one did not come to me. No, I haven't been able to view that one in person.
Because I've heard those are really exquisite and they're made out of diamonds as well. So.
Yeah, no, they're lovely, but no, this one didn't come to us. The family did retain a few things from the collection, rightly so. It's nice to have those
Of course,
memories, some of which were sentimental. So very lovely, and it's important to have that.
exactly. And speaking of sentimental jewels, we can go on to the next slide where there are really two exquisite brooches by Verdura. And you were able to find in your research a connection that the late Countess was one of very close to Verdura himself and was one of the few people allowed to watch him work, which is so makes it such an extraordinary link.
So two of, I think, the most charming and endearing lots in the whole auction are these two animal brooches, which were made by Vidora. These are from Virginia Ogilvy's personal collection. What I think is so lovely is that actually Virginia Ogilvy knew Fruco de Vidora. They were friends through her mother, from what I understand. But uh, Otto Kahn's daughters, Margaret and Maud, who were known as Nin and Momo, were sort of, those glamorous Americans traveling around Europe in the 1920s. And in the summer of 1923, they found themselves in Venice. And who else was in Venice but Duke Fluco de Vidora? So we understand that they became friends at that time and continued a friendship for decades to come. Vidora obviously relocated to New York in the subsequent years, setting up his workshop and his business there. And we know through an account in the book written by Vidora that there was one young woman who was allowed to come and visit him and watch him work. And it was Virginia Ogilvy, well, Virginia Ryan as she was then. And what I thought was so fun for me personally, as a jewelry historian, as someone who trained as an archaeologist, and I'm always out trying to discover, lost facts and things like that. But I was sitting at home reading the Vidora book because I knew our unicorn was illustrated in there. And I have to say, I'm glad I probably had a cup of tea or something and was a bit switched on and not too groggy because opposite the page where the unicorn is illustrated, there's a first-hand account of a girl who knew Vidora, and you might not catch it because they use an abbreviation of her nickname. Her nickname was Ginny. They use Gin, and they use her maiden name Ryan. So Nin Ryan's daughter, Jin, had special permission to visit Fluco on her way home after school and was one of the few people who was allowed to watch him work. And Vidor was very private. He didn't like people coming in and watching him work, visiting his atelier. He very famously would shout out, "Tell him I'm dead," if someone showed up unannounced, which is, I have to say, a line I've been known to use myself. I didn't know it was a Vidora line, I have to say. But he let this young girl his old friend's daughter into his workshop, and she describes in the book watching him work with Baroque pearls because Baroque pearls form such a notable amount of Vidora's creation, particularly for brooches. And she described how he would put the physical pearl that he wanted to use in the jewel on a piece of paper and then very quickly trace around it the animal that he wanted to create. Um, and then here we have lot number two in the sale is a dove with a Baroque pearl torso. So how wonderful for her to have been able to watch him create things, and then for us to be able to offer one of her own examples of that creation in this auction.
And I think we can go to the next slide for this one and talk about this extraordinary paper knife with a Fabergé handle, which you said originally came from a lady's parasol.
So it was a cane, yes, a parasol or a cane, and it was adapted. And what's really beautiful about this one is the way it's been decorated. If you look very closely, it has very realistically modeled clovers all over it. So a clover being a symbol of good luck, and I believe it's both 3 and 4 leaf clovers on there, which
Oh,
is
wow.
very much so charming. And what I personally think is so nice about this one is the connection. So this was made by the workmaster. We've dated it to approximately 1900. That workmaster went on to create the 1902 imperial egg, which was gifted to the Tsar, and that was called the clover egg. So it was covered in almost identically worked clovers, some of which were set with diamonds.
Oh,
And
wow.
it is an incredible imperial egg, very, very beautiful. So it's a lovely connection to see that same iconography continued again here in a utilitarian object. Yeah, Michael Persson was the workmaster for Fabergé, and he very, very sadly died quite young in 1903. So the egg that he made, the clover egg in 1902, was one of his last creations. So this would assumingly be a contemporary example.
Oh, wow. And is there any provenance of how it came into the early collection? Because Queen Alexandra and Queen Mary were both great patrons of Fabergé, and they gift a lot of pieces to their friends and their close relatives. So I wonder if it may come from that, or is there no kind of paper trail to back that up?
There's no paper trail. I will say that this one does not have London marks on it. Fabergé in London was a favorite of the British aristocracy and, of course, the Queen. And Fabergé items in London were particularly bought with the deliberate purpose of being gifts. So one would go there looking for gifts, which is a lovely gift to receive and to give. Um, but in this instance, there are only Russian marks on it, which means that it could possibly have come straight from Russia. But we don't know exactly how it came to find its way to London.
No, it's very extraordinary. And I think we can move on to the next slide, which has the vanity cases and cigarette cases, which are such fascinating examples. And the Art Deco one is definitely my favorite, and I believe that came from Virginia's grandmother.
Yes, so you have the VCA long one in that traditional basket weave design. Now that was made by VCA New York, but the earlier examples, we have the enameled Cartier case, which is about 1925, and the Art Deco one, which is onyx. So carved onyx, two pieces of carved onyx forming a lid in the base and having the monogram for her grandmother, which is AKW for, of course, um, Adele Wolf Kahn. And she was Otto Kahn's wife. And Otto Kahn was, such a massive New York financier, the pinnacle of New York society, a great patron of the arts, director of the Metropolitan Opera Association, Manhattan School of Music, an incredibly philanthropically dedicated woman. And having something that would have been such a personal item to her. This is the 1920s, where all of a sudden women are becoming socially, it's becoming socially acceptable for women to not only wear makeup, but to be seen wearing makeup. And then these items, these cases were the sort of thing that one would very obviously put down on the table. You weren't squirreling these away in your bag. You were bringing these out, putting them on the table to be seen and admired by your fellow diners when one was out in society. And the onyx case opens up. It has two little compartments inside, probably for lipstick and rouge. And the condition on it is just wonderful. It's just such a tactile, beautiful item.
Yeah, it was exquisite, and one of those things that when I held it, I could really feel the history coming from it. And but the like you were saying, it's such an intimate piece of someone's wardrobe and being something that they would have used every day. So to be a part of that and have something that's so exquisite, that was extraordinary.
And something that has such a tactile beauty to it. It's not a huge object, It's only sort of 7 centimeters wide. So it fits very nicely in the palm of one hand and has a real tactile open, close. I don't know. There's something very engaging about just handling it.
Yes, no, it's beautiful. And then we go to the next slide where we see a selection of the other jewels from the late Countess. And I wanted to know kind of about your creative process, about why you chose kind of these particular jewels in general, because the estimates for them aren't anywhere near the tiara, and they are exquisite pieces, but there must have been kind of a lot of substantial jewels in the collection. So why these pieces in particular?
So I think for me, it was about representing her as a woman as a whole. Everyone who knew her will tell you that she actually loved a bit of fun jewelry. She was a particular fan of Kenneth Lane costume jewelry. And although we don't sell costume jewelry, I didn't, so we wanted to find something that was a bit more fun. And there was some,
Yes.
some real interesting items. The shell necklace was just so bizarre to me. I mean, I just love it. It is, it's 18 karat gold, it's shells. And then of course, when we discovered the shell compact, which the family believed to be by Verdura, it all made sense. This all came together, We have pictures, you found pictures of her in the Bahamas, so she was a woman who liked a bit of sunshine like we all do. And I just love this idea of, these fun, not ostentatious jewels, not kept at Buckingham Palace, but just very engaging. The shell necklace has an estimate of 100 to 200 pounds. So, not unobtainable in price. And then the bees, so charming, so tactile, so well made. And then, of course, the little tiny, this is a modern Fabergé piece, but just a little tiny thing that, just represents the sort of everyday jewels, as it were, that we all have sort of things like this, but nice to represent her own creativity, her own personal style.
Yeah, like you were saying, it's very important to, and aside of the important the tiara and the other big jewels, and especially the pieces representing family, it's really nice to see something that represents her as an individual and not something burdened by family history and the tradition of her role and her position.
Exactly. We're all human, even though, we go to work, we do one job, we go home, we put on a different hat, as it were, different jewels.
No, and it's nice to see that, like you were saying, the pictures of her in the Bahamas and everything was
The
very different.
Very different. Yeah, nice to see people, enjoying life and living it.
Yes, and I think now we're reaching kind of, we have discussed the jewels, and there is something very kind of extraordinary. This is just one selection from a lot of thoughts that are coming on auction at the sale. Um, kind of from, I want to ask about kind of your career trajectory and kind of what got you into working at Lyon Turnbull, and kind of what has been the highlight of your kind of the past few years? And is this the most extraordinary collection, or have you been involved in a few other kind of important sales that have come up at auction?
So I have been a jewelry historian, auctioneer, jewelry specialist in the auction world, whatever you want to call it, for about 15 years now. I started at Bonhams, and I was very, very grateful for all my colleagues there who took me under their wings, taught me everything I know. Um, more or less. And I spent 6 years at Bonhams. I started as the administrator and I left as a specialist at Bond Street. So I worked my way up, as it were, like so many of us do.
Wow.
So it was definitely a great place to learn and handle an extraordinary number of items. So not the first time I've sold important tiaras, not the first time I've sold substantial pieces. We were consigning and I personally consigning and selling, sort of seven-figure lots, as it were. But I joined Lyon and Turnbull about 18 months ago, and it was a chance to bring my personal passion for sort of jewelry that's accessible, jewelry that has, a beautiful history and provenance, and to invest in the London market because I personally feel like the London market needs investment and needs attention. And it's a wonderful place to find, particularly historic, noble jewels. And it's nice to see them stay in London and not be sent overseas. So it's one of my passions is to make sure that we're appreciating and developing the London market and keeping it as such a strong place for people all over the world to come and buy beautiful antique to contemporary jewelry.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. And thank you so much for inviting us to come view the pieces in person, and joining us today to discuss about them. Because it is, like you're saying, it's very important to keep London at the center of the jewelry world. There's such a rich history. And the past few years, because of political and economic issues, that has been shifting a bit. So it's nice to see it.
Mm.
I think this year London has really been the center of a lot of jewelry exhibitions and sales.
Mm.
It's nice to see this a big part of that.
It's true. It's true. London maintains its place as a hub, and it's nice to invest in it. I think that we should all regroup in about 10 days' time and have a post-sale debrief when this is all done and dusted and the results are in.
We'd love that, and
Mm.
definitely. This is so extraordinary, and I think just being able to have the opportunity to have this connection with you, that's makes it so much more special.
It's such a pleasure. Like I said, it's a real passion of mine. I want to make sure that jewelry is accessible to everybody. Um, Jewelry is very special. It's very rare. It's very delicate, and it can be very expensive. But that doesn't mean that people can't enjoy it, access it, appreciate it, handle it. And it's yeah, like I said, it's a real passion of mine. So I'm thrilled that you were able to come in and see them in person.
Yeah, thank you so much, and couldn't put it any better. Just before we end, could you tell our listeners and our viewers kind of all the details about the auction and where people can come and view it? Is there a link online or just the
Of
dates and
course.
general details?
Yeah. So the most important thing, so the jewelry auction, London Jewelry at Lyon Turnbull will take place on the 22nd of October, starting at 1 p.m. London time. Before that, you can come in and view the items in person. The auction has many days of viewings beforehand. They're starting on Friday the 17th, continuing Saturday, and then Monday and Tuesday, the 20th and 21st. So that's in our gallery on Connaught Street, just near Marble Arch. If you go to Lyon and Turnbull, London Jewelry, Google that, you will find all the details and the address, but you are very welcome.
Wonderful, and we'll include all the details and when on all the platforms that this will be published, so people can access it easily.
We can't wait to welcome everyone to